This is the story of a single film that cost $44 million to make, earned $3.5 million at the box office, and forced the sale of one of Hollywood's most celebrated studios. Heaven's Gate didn't just fail in 1980. It destroyed United Artists, ended an era of director-driven filmmaking, and rewrote the rules by which studios would operate for decades to come. To understand how that happened, you need to go back to the beginning, not to the film itself, but to the studio that funded it. The Dream Factory. Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith founded United Artists in 1919 with an idea that was, for the time, almost unthinkable. A studio run by artists, for artists, where creative people controlled their own work rather than answering to corporate executives. For decades, that founding spirit held, and then in 1951, Arthur Krim and Robert Benjamin took over and rebuilt the company not as a traditional production house, but as a financier and distributor, a model that gave filmmakers unusual creative freedom while keeping the studio lean. By the 1970s, that model had produced something extraordinary. Best Picture winners kept flowing out of United Artists. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Rocky, Annie Hall. Alongside the Oscars came the James Bond franchise, the Pink Panther series, and the Rocky franchise. By most measures, no studio in Hollywood was having a better decade. And then, in 1978, the architects of that entire run walked out. Arthur Krim and Robert Benjamin resigned to form their own company, Orion Pictures, and a new president named Andy Albeck was installed in their place. Into that leadership vacuum walked a director named Michael Cimino, holding a script that would bring the whole thing down. The man who could do anything. Born February 3, 1939, Michael Cimino arrived at film directing through an unusual path, spending his early career in New York advertising and commercial work before turning to screenwriting, where he wrote the scripts for Silent Running and Magnum Force, before directing his first feature, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, in 1974. His second film rewrote his entire professional biography. The Deer Hunter, released in 1978, was a brutal 3-hour Vietnam War epic that collected 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, and overnight Cimino became one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood, carrying a kind of creative authority that few filmmakers ever accumulate. The Heaven's Gate script had been sitting in a drawer since 1971, when Cimino called it the Johnson County War, and the story drew from a real event, the 1892 conflict in Wyoming, where wealthy cattle barons hired an army of gunmen to massacre poor European immigrant homesteaders. Class warfare, raw political power, the dark side of the American dream. This was exactly the kind of ambitious, charged material that had defined New Hollywood at its height. After The Deer Hunter swept the Oscars, United Artists wanted Cimino's next project. He had power, and every term of the deal that followed reflects how completely he used it. The deal nobody should have made. An approved budget of $11.6 million, a 69-day shooting schedule, creative control, final cut, and his name above the title. Those were Cimino's terms, and United Artists accepted every one of them, agreeing on top of everything else to absorb any cost overruns that developed. The key executives on the studio side were President Andy Albeck and co-heads of production Stephen Bach and David Field. And Bach would later document exactly how the disaster unfolded in a 1985 book called Final Cut. The warning signs appeared at the very first conversation. At their first lunch together, according to Bach's account, Cimino openly admitted that he had run roughly 100% over budget on The Deer Hunter, and while budget discussions were still in progress, he quietly added 2 large-scale scenes that required a 30% cost increase, all while insisting he could still deliver on the original 69-day schedule. Over the studio's explicit objections, he also demanded to cast an unknown French actress named Isabelle Huppert in a lead role. United Artists said yes to all of it, which in hindsight seems almost incomprehensible for any major studio regardless of the director's track record. But this was 1978 and 1979, when the director was king, and United Artists had built its entire identity on trusting artists above all else. That belief was about to cost them everything. The production from hell. Principal photography got underway April 16, 1979, near Kalispell, Montana, in the area around Glacier National Park. And within days, the numbers coming back to the studio told a story nobody wanted to read. 6 days in, Cimino had burned through roughly $900,000 and produced about a minute and a half of usable footage, while sitting 5 days behind schedule at the same time. 2 weeks in, he was 10 days behind, 15 script pages behind, and had accumulated approximately 3 minutes of usable material, putting the production on pace to cost roughly $1 million per minute of running time. What followed across the next several months was unlike anything the industry had seen. Cimino shot approximately 1.3 to 1.5 million feet of film, the equivalent of around 220 hours of footage, at a daily burn rate of approximately $200,000. His crew called him the Ayatollah, and Brad Dourif, who appeared in the film, recalled working under a minimum of 32 takes per shot, with Cimino reportedly pushing past 50 takes on some setups. 1 full day of shooting went entirely to a single scene of Chris Christopherson cracking a whip, and Cimino was said to hold up filming to wait for a specific cloud formation to appear in the Montana sky. Musicians brought to the set for a 3-week assignment found themselves stranded for months, and John Hurt waited so long for his scenes that he left the production to film The Elephant Man, and then returned. Every delayed day was a day the studio had already agreed to absorb, and there seemed to be no end to the delays. And then there were the animals. The scandal that changed Hollywood forever. The American Humane Association, whose role was to monitor the welfare of animals on film sets, tried to place representatives on the Heaven's Gate production. And according to The Hollywood Reporter, those representatives were barred at gunpoint from the Heaven's Gate set in Montana's Glacier National Park. What they were being kept from witnessing was serious. At least 4 horses died during production, with some sources placing the count at 5, and 1 horse was reportedly blown up while a rider remained on its back, a rider who survived while the horse did not. Others were tripped using wire. Cattle were reportedly bled from the neck so actors could be covered in real blood. Chickens were killed on camera, and an actual cockfight, not a staged recreation but a real one, was filmed and cut into the picture. A horse owner sued over an abused Arabian gelding. The case settled out of court, and the AHA organized boycott picket lines outside theaters while issuing an international press release. None of that, though, turned out to be the most durable consequence of what happened on that Montana set, because in 1980, the Screen Actors Guild Agreement was formally amended to authorize AHA oversight of animals on all filmed productions, and that amendment became the direct legal origin of the No Animals Were Harmed certification that appears in film and television credits to this day. Michael Cimino's most notorious production is, whether he would have appreciated the irony or not, the reason that certification exists. Back in the studio offices, the budget had already surpassed $30 million. The studio loses control. United Artists executives understood by this point that they had a full-scale disaster in progress, and they seriously considered pulling Cimino off the film entirely, reportedly looking at Norman Jewison, among others, as a possible replacement. Cimino kept threatening to take the project to a competing studio, UA, called The Bluff, and no other studio came forward to take it on. In a direct attempt to reassert control, UA fired producer Joanne Corelli and replaced her with its own executives, then imposed a budget cap of $25 million. A freelance journalist named Les Gapé, who had worked on the production as an extra, published an expose in the Washington Post that ran nationally, laying out the waste, excess, and mistreatment of extras and animals in detail. The public scandal was fully formed before a single ticket went on sale. None of the studio's interventions changed the trajectory, and when principal photography wrapped in March 1980, the negative cost alone had reached nearly $32 million, almost 3 times the approved budget. Then came the editing room, and what emerged from it was something no one at the studio was prepared for. The night nobody drank the champagne. On June 26, 1980, Cimino screened a work print of the finished film for United Artists executives, and it ran 325 minutes, nearly 5.5 hours. The executives refused it. Cimino cut it to 219 minutes, and that version premiered November 19, 1980 at Cinema One in New York City. At intermission, the mood in the theatre was quiet and subdued, and Cimino reportedly turned to his publicist to ask why no one was drinking the champagne that had been set out for the occasion. Her answer came back without hesitation. "Because they hate the movie, Michael." The reviews the next morning confirmed everything. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called Heaven's Gate something quite rare in movies these days, an unqualified disaster, and wrote that it fails so completely that you might suspect Mr. Cimino sold his soul to the devil to obtain the success of The Deer Hunter, and the devil has just come around to collect. Watching it, Canby wrote, felt like a forced 4-hour walking tour of one's own living room. Roger Ebert awarded the film half a star out of 4. This movie is $36 million thrown to the winds. It is the most scandalous cinematic waste I have ever seen. And remember, I've seen Paint Your Wagon. The studio pulled Heaven's Gate after a single week. Back into editing it went, trimmed to 149 minutes, and returned to theatres on April 24, 1981, into approximately 810 locations, where it failed as completely as the first release had, prompting Canby to write, "Heaven's Gate looks like a fat man who's been on a crash diet. Though it's thinner, it's not appreciably different." $3,484,331. That's the total domestic box office the film collected, according to Box Office Mojo, against a total cost of approximately $44 million, and a break-even number that Stephen Buck's final cut placed at approximately $140 million. The studio's loss exceeded $40 million. The death of United Artists. The financial damage broke the studio. United Artists recorded massive losses for the year with Heaven's Gate as the primary cause, and by January 1981, Andy Albeck had been moved to a ceremonial chairman role before resigning the following month. Stephen Buck was fired, David Field had already cleared out before the premiere, and the entire leadership team that had greenlit the project was gone within weeks of each other. Transamerica Corporation, the conglomerate that had acquired United Artists back in 1967, agreed on May 27, 1981, to sell the studio to MGM, controlled by Kirk Kerkorian's Trescinda Corporation, for $380 million, and the deal closed July 28, 1981. United Artists was absorbed into MGM UA Entertainment and ceased to operate as an independent studio after more than 60 years in business. One detail worth holding on to: Transamerica had originally purchased United Artists for approximately $180 million, so the $380 million sale price actually returned a profit to the parent company, as Buck himself noted. The studio that Chaplin, Pickford, Fairbanks and Griffith had built to give artists control of their own work was gone all the same. Finished not by a hostile takeover or a market collapse, but by one film and the decisions made around it. Hollywood watched and adjusted accordingly. The end of an era. Heaven's Gate did not bring down the new Hollywood on its own, and the history here deserves accuracy. Jaws in 1975 and Star Wars in 1977 had already demonstrated the commercial reach of high-concept blockbuster filmmaking, and other costly director-driven failures had preceded Cimino's, including William Friedkin's Sorcerer, Martin Scorsese's New York, New York, and Steven Spielberg's 1941. What Heaven's Gate supplied was the final, undeniable case study. After a studio had been sold and an entire leadership team scattered because of a single director's unchecked decision-making, the industry moved toward tighter budgets, earlier test screenings, and corporate production oversight that would have been unthinkable to the filmmakers who had run the previous decade. The director was no longer king, and the transition from 1970s auteur cinema to the commercial blockbuster era of the 1980s had its clearest, most expensive symbol. The title of Cimino's film entered the language as a permanent Hollywood shorthand for catastrophic overreach. When Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves ran over schedule and over budget, crews started calling it Kevin's Gate, and Waterworld earned the same nickname years later. That shorthand has never gone away, because Heaven's Gate gave it a meaning nothing else had quite managed to supply. The verdict that changed. The story of Heaven's Gate doesn't end with the sale of United Artists, because what came next is the part that doesn't fit the cautionary tale. A complete critical reversal, decades in the making. As early as 1982, the Los Angeles cable channel Z Channel aired the 219-minute version and started a quiet reassessment, and European critics, particularly in France, had never shared the hostility of their American counterparts. The real break, though, arrived more than 30 years after that opening night in New York. August 2012 brought a newly restored 216-minute director's cut to the Venice Film Festival, where festival director Alberto Barbera called it an absolute masterpiece and described what had happened to the film in 1980 as one of the greatest injustices of cinematic history. On November 20th, 2012, the Criterion Collection released the restored cut on Blu-ray and DVD, a restoration supervised by Cimino himself and by Joanne Corelli. And the Criterion endorsement carries a particular weight in the world of cinema preservation. Critics and scholars returning to the film found things the 1980 press corps, primed by months of scandal coverage and hostility before they ever sat down in the theatre, had apparently been unable to see. Vilmos Zsigmond's cinematography drew particular attention. Those vast, painterly landscapes shot in burnished golden light, now recognized as some of the finest work in the history of American film. The epic roller skating sequence in the immigrant settlement, the grand waltz at Harvard, the sheer scale of the mass battle scenes, these were the exact sequences held up in 1980 as evidence of waste and self-indulgence, and viewed without that context, critics found them extraordinary. In 2015, the BBC polled 62 film critics from around the world to compile a list of the 100 greatest American films ever made, and Heaven's Gate ranked 98th, placing the film Canby had called an unqualified disaster alongside Citizen Kane. Chris Christopherson, speaking after Cimino's death on July 2, 2016, said, "The story looked so much like the America I saw around me when Reagan was taking power. Michael was collateral damage." Isabel Huppert told The Hollywood Reporter in November 2016, "He was extraordinary, probably one of the greatest living American filmmakers. Basically, he never really, deep inside, got over it." Cimino himself in 2002 put his position plainly. "It took me a long time before I was able to say, I'm proud of that movie. And I am proud of it. I could not have made it any better than I made it. No excuses and no regrets." Strip away the mythology and what remains are facts that have lost none of their force. An $11.6 million film that became a $44 million film. A 69-day shoot that stretched into nearly a year in Montana. A movie that earned $3.5 million against costs that required $140 million to break even, and the event that ended the independent existence of a studio Charlie Chaplin helped found. The No Animals Were Harmed certification that appears in nearly every film and television production you have ever watched traces its legal origins directly back to what happened on that Montana set in 1979, which makes Heaven's Gate among everything else it is, the source of a protection that outlasted everyone involved in making it. The studio it destroyed is gone, and the era it ended is gone. But the film itself is still here, sitting 98th on the BBC's list of the greatest American films ever made, preserved in the Criterion Collection, and still producing the kind of arguments that only genuinely unresolved work generates. Michael Cimino died on July 2nd, 2016, having spent the last 3 decades of his life watching his most ambitious project get demolished and then, improbably, reclaimed. Subscribe. Hollywood's biggest disasters always had a story nobody told.